Good morning. My name is Kyle Houchins, technical trainer for McNeil. This is Getting Started Rhino for Windows. And today I want to talk about a deceivingly simple object that we're going to throw a little wrinkle into. And the wrinkle of this project is this fairly innocuous, fairly simple looking shape, but it's got a fading detail on it down here. So it's got this little detail that starts down here and fades into the rest of this organic shape. And typically speaking, if we were going to do this with NURBS, right, we would just do a very simple, and in fact, this is actually one of the level 1 or level 2 projects where we would just take this shape, and I'm just going to do this super quick, and we would revolve it, which seems very simple, right? And we would full circle this, and then we'd squish it, right? And then in order to get the detail on it, we would actually just take a plane and run it through here. And the way that we would do that is we just drag this and hold down shift and we get a plane. And that makes this detail, right? And if I cap this, and if I mirror this, oh well, mirror this. My fingers aren't warmed up yet, sorry. There we go. And then if we just do a Boolean split, we get that, right? Now, and that's all fine, but that's kind of not what we want. We want this shape to, to be kind of bulbous, and we want this all to be smooth, and we want this all, to have a little detail on it. And so the challenge here is you could try to figure out how to model your way around that in NURBS, and we could build a surface that's got some crown, and then we could build a transition in here, and we could have some kind of crazy blend that starts out really big and gets really tiny down here and all that kind of stuff. And that is a completely and 100% valid exercise, and that's a completely valid way to do it. However, because in version 7 we have SubD available to ourselves, and how many of you, just hit the chat and let me know let me know how many folks have had a chance to play with SubD yet? If you haven't, you're going to now. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to model this thing in a couple of different pieces, and we're going to use the best tool, SubD subdivision surfaces. Yes, it's this palette right up here, the SubD tools. So if you haven't had a chance to play with this yet, you're either going to love this or hate this, because this is where we're going for a little while. And so I did this awful sketch earlier today just to get an idea down, to try and figure out what we were going to talk about today. And I was looking at a couple of different shapes, and I looked at this and I thought, well, this is kind of a standard, level 2 NURBS exercise. And then I thought, well, actually, if we throw this detail in here, this actually turns it from a fairly simple project into an actually a kind of a very complex modeling problem. And the nice thing about SubD is it takes those complex modeling problems and it makes them actually fairly simple. And so I started this project the same way I always do a 2-second sketch, which is one of the reasons I like Rhino, because I don't have to sketch quite as much as I used to. I can just throw something together, have a communication with myself, decide what it is I'm going to do, throw it into Rhino using the picture command. And if you are not familiar with the picture command, let's go back and run that. We just do the picture command, find our drawing, and we drag it into the space. We can move it around, scale it, rotate it, do whatever we want. And I'm going to go here to the materials palette. If you don't have the materials palette or the materials tab here, right click, find materials in this list and make sure that it's checked, and that will give you this materials palette. If you click on this, you'll see that this material's loaded up already, which is the soap bottle JPEG. And we're just going to crank the transparency up a little bit just so it fades and it's a little easier to work over. And then we're going to stick it on a layer. I'm going to change the layer here, go to perspective view, and I'm going to drag it out of the modeling window back here like this. And the reason that I do that is, everybody asks me, why do you do that? The reason I do that is because if you're modeling, especially in shaded view, this is what you get. So you can't see the image at all. So I take this and I just drag it back in space, which allows me to be able to still see what I'm doing, but in the front view, the image is still, you know, it's still placed where I want it. I'm going to drop this just on the origin just for the sake of it, have it vaguely centered and all that kind of stuff, and we'll use that to work on. And then I'm going to lock this layer. Now I can work over it, and because it's faded, when I draw curves, I can see what they're doing and all that kind of stuff. So how do we approach any shape in SubD? And for me, the simplest, easiest way to approach SubD is to do what I call the paper doll workflow. And I'm going to diverge for just a second and grab a video and show you this SubD hand challenge. Just if you haven't seen it, is this video here, Rhino 7 SubD hand challenge. I'm going to put a link in the chat so you can check it out if you haven't so far. And the idea behind this is what I refer to as a paper doll construction. And if you look at this image, and it might be difficult for you to see, but the idea behind paper doll, and you can see what's going on here, is basically we take an object and we divide it up into little squares. And we take those squares and we connect them into a flat object, right? And the flat object is what I refer to as the paper doll. And I'm going to just shut this down so that it doesn't burn up bandwidth. But in this particular case, what we're going to do is look at this, and I'm going to grab my little marker thing here, and we're going to look at this and say, how does this break up? Now, the important thing to look at is this shape right here. This is what's going to drive the entire creation of this object, is this oval shape. And so we've obviously got a center line, and we need 3 points to make a corner, right? So we need at least 3 edges here. So we've got a point here, a point here, a point here, a point here. So we got 4. But that gives us enough stuff that we can go 1, 2, 3 here, 1, 2, 3 here, and we get our 2 separate shapes. Looks good now? Okay, fantastic. Thank you for letting me know. So this is essentially the first paper doll that we're going to create. And let me clear this. And so we will go ahead and start drawing. If we go to the SubD menu, we're going to just start drawing a square, right? We're just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to just hit enter to accept it. And then I'm going to switch to box mode, which is under the tab key. So I'm going to hit the tab key, and that's going to give me my first square. Now, my second square, I'm just going to grab this edge. I'm going to shift control drag that edge, and it's going to light it up. And I'm just going to drag down to about here. I'm going to do the same thing again, and I'm going to drag down to here. I'm going to shift control drag a point, and I'm just going to pull this, I don't know, somewhere in there. And I'm going to pull this somewhere in here. Now, this gives us kind of a stop sign shape, which we don't want. So I'm going to shift control drag this point. I'm going to shift control drag this point. I'm just going to delete them. Look what happens. Those turn into triangles. And that is going to allow us to do some things in here. And I'm just going to line these points up. We'll try to keep everything like kind of nice and orderly with SubD. And if I hit the tab key, you'll see I'm starting to get this nice round shape. Whereas if I had left those points let's see, put it back where I found it. If I'd left those points, I still get this kind of shape here, but there's two edges, and I don't necessarily want two edges. If I turn my points on, you can see them. There's an edge here and an edge here, right? 1, 2, right there. So I don't necessarily want that, but I might be skipping ahead a little bit. So let me hold off on that for just a second, even though I already showed you that. Let's grab this entire object and let's just mirror it. And I'm going to just mirror it over here, and then I'm going to join. Because this center line is coincident, because all of these points line up, the join command will actually join a SubD, and there's a smooth option here, which is what I wanted. And you'll see now that we have our first paper doll, right? And we can experiment and see, does getting rid of these edges help or hurt? Or points, I should say. We should get rid of these points. And does it help or hurt? And in this case, I think it initially looks like it hurt us, right? But if I drag this back out to the shape that I was looking at, I think that I'm going to just scale this whole edge out. I think the shape is a little bit more conducive to what we were hoping for, right? And so I think I'm going to say that was the right choice. And that gives us this kind of, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles shell here. And now we can start playing with adding some shape to it, right? I could just pull a little bit of shape in here like this. And because we kept this really simple, this is very easy to modify, and it's very clean and very nice to work with, right? So I'm going to pull this a little bit off the center line here, right? Assuming that the center line is obviously going to be the center line of our object. And then I'm going to mirror it. I'm going to bring it back here like this. And now I've got my front and my back, and this thing is starting to come together pretty quick. If I pick these two edges and then double click in between, pick these two edges, double click in between, I get partial edge selection, which is what I want, because I'm going to bridge those edges using the bridge command. And I'm going to add two segments because I do actually want a center line through here. And I may pull that out later, but for now, I want a center line because that gives me my third point. 1, 2, 3. There's another video that I'd like you to look up called Rule of 3, and that is also on our YouTube page, and that talks about how to make a corner bend in SubD, and you need 3 points to make a corner just like you do with a NURBS curve, right? And I'll just digress for a second and cover that. If we make a NURBS curve, right, we've got an anchor point, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, and then we've got an anchor point. So the corners are all made up of 3 points, right? 1, 2, 3, right there. And if we modify those 3 points and put them closer together, we're going to get a sharper corner. You're going to see this later. If we move these farther apart, you get a softer corner. And so in order to bend something in SubD, or NURBS for that matter, you need at least 3 points to make that corner. And in SubD, we try to keep that in the back of our mind, because if I want to, say for instance, if I were to get rid of this, you'll see that this becomes much softer than it was before, right? See, that's a little sharp, and that's a little softer. And the reason for that is now our 3 points are 1, 2, 3 makes up this curve right here. And this curve back here is made up of 1, 2, 3 right there. So these points kind of steal from each other and make this big soft shape. If I put this guy back, now my curve is 1, 2, 3, right? Oops, missed that one. 1, 2, 3. So this shape and this shape now can function independently because we have this center point, right? So I can modify this to do whatever I want. So for now, I'm going to leave it because I want to have the opportunity to be able to do things like soften the center line of this thing or sharpen the center line of this thing or do whatever. And for now, I think that's what I want. But I'll find out in a little bit whether or not that's actually what I want or not, and we'll see. So now we're going to take this piece, right? Let's go to box mode so that we can see what we're doing. And I'm going to extrude this face, and I'm going to use the C-plane waffle here, and I'm going to hold down the control key, and I'm just going to pull a face. Oops. I'm going to pull a face out of here. So I'm going to start dragging it, and I'm going to hold down control, and then that's going to drag a face out here. And I'm going to just place it somewhere in that vicinity. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. Shift Control click. I'm going to start dragging this C-plane waffle, and then I'm going to hold down control, and it's going to give me a face. Whoops. Let's do it again. Get in a view where I can see it. Start dragging, hold down control, drags out a face. And so that's going to give me essentially this loop that I'm looking for. And let's grab all three of these points and let's stitch them. I'm going to stitch those like that. And now I'm going to open this a little bit, and I'm going to pull this guy kind of out like that, and I'm going to pull this guy out like that. And then what I might do is stitch these two guys together, and I want them to be vaguely in the center. And then I'm going to move this down and create a ring like that, right? And once I have this ring, I may actually just delete that, mirror again, and join again. That way I don't have to do the work twice. So we've got our basic layout here, right? And you can see that our flow is nice, our shapes are nice, and all I need to do is finish out the bottom of this. So I'm going to double click this edge, which is going to give me this loop, and I'm just going to extrude, and I'm going to extrude. And then I'm going to click this and scale to 0, and that's going to flatten out my bottom. And you can see that we've got a really nice base for what we wanted to make, right? Let's go to the front view, and we can go to wireframe, and we can adjust it a little bit. And we actually are pretty darn close. I'm pretty happy with that. So let's slide this up a little bit. I'm going to just place this edge kind of right there, and then let's flatten out this one a little bit like that and slide it up, and then let's move the base up. And there's a little bit of parallax on this drawing, so I'm going to call that the bottom, and we're going to assume that that's flat as opposed to the drawing, which is badly drawn. All right, so let's take a look at our overall shape and see what we need to adjust. So from the right-hand view, this thing is a little not very balanced, right? So let's just scale the base out a little bit like this, and we're going to scale this base out a little bit, and we're going to grab these two edges, scale those guys out a little bit. We're going to get a little bit nicer shape out of that. And then we're going to do the same thing up here. I'm going to just scale all of this together. And then maybe I'll go back and bring this back out so that it's got a little bit softer form to that. But it gives us this kind of a little bit nicer shape. But you can see that we've got this nice highlight that comes in and comes out and fades, away, right? It goes away up here and it comes back down here, which is nice. And if we look at this in a rendered view, and if I throw a material on here, we can see that we are doing what we wanted. Now, the only thing that we have to decide is how much detail and how much sharpness do we want out of this line. And we can always add more by inserting an edge, right? Somewhere, let's put it somewhere in here, and then we'll mess around with it a little bit, get it a little bit cleaner where we want it to, right? So we can sharpen this up if we want. See how that detail starts to sharpen up? And we can fade it out by getting rid of edges up here. And this is one of my favorite things about SubD is it's super durable. I can just add stuff and take stuff away and experiment and see what it is, you know, that's going on here. And maybe I want to play with the topology a little bit and I want to stitch those two edges together and create something really sharp. No, maybe that's not going to work. Let's see. I don't love that. Maybe this edge needs to go away. That's a little better. So it's got a little sharper chin on there, right? But it still fades out nicely. And I'm not worrying about the backside because I can simply just come back here and delete this. And let's fix a little bit of our box mode here. Let's grab this and this and this, and let's flatten that out. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to come down here and relocate the gumball right to the center, and then I'm just going to scale it to 0. That straightens out the whole center line, and then we've got a little bit of a mess here that I don't like. So let's fix that. Let's take this edge. I try not to build stuff that's got crazy crossing verts. So we're going to straighten those out a little bit so that they're not all whacked out. And then let's see what that did. And that seems to have cleaned it up just a little bit. But we've got our nice fading detail back. And we messed up one side and we didn't do the other. So let's just shift control drag. We're going to get rid of all of this again. We're just going to mirror. There is a reflect command. I find it a little bit invasive sometimes, and so a lot of times what I'll do is just what I just showed, which is to jump back and forth between the two. All right, so we've got our basic shape, and the cool thing about this is because we've built this way, we can now iterate with this in SubD, which is super, super useful because we can take this and we can squish it, we can stretch it, we can do all sorts of things and get all sorts of different shapes. This can be flatter across the top, this can be wider through the middle, this can be, you know, we can drastically change very, very quickly and create all sorts of different shapes from this initial design. And so a lot of times what I'll do when I'm working on a SubD project, I'll actually take this and I'll send this to a clip art file where I'll actually keep this as a quote bottle base. And then the next time I have to do a bottle that has a shape like this, I'll bring in this piece to start with, and it saves me the trouble of having to go and you know, redo this work from scratch because it's already done. Let's finish up the bottom of this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down a scale handle and I'm going to start dragging. Then I'm going to hold down Shift, which is going to scale it uniformly. Then I'm going to hold down Control, and that actually is going to start extruding out new faces. So click, drag, hold Shift, hold Control, and now we get another face that's added down here, right? So we added this ring and we added this ring. And all without going to the toolbar. This is all off of the gumball. And so now what I can do is I can take these 4 points, Shift, Control, click, I can hit Stitch, and that's going to close them all up into the center, which gives me the opportunity to put my bubble bottom in there just by pushing that up, right? So now we've got that really great shape, and we can mess with the base of this. Say we print this and decide that it's too top heavy. All we have to do is just drag some more base in there, right? So it's super easy to modify, which is one of the things I like about SubD over NURBS, because if we had done this, you know, in NURBS with curves and surfaces and fillets and blends and all that kind of stuff, we'd have to get into like cage editing or all sorts of stuff like that in order to be able to mess with this thing if we had found out there's a problem down the road. Where with SubD, it's just as simple as going, well, we need more base on this thing, or we need less base on this thing. And that's super, super useful, right? So we've got the basis of our shape now, and I'm pretty happy with the way that this is looking. So we can start looking at the rest of the model. And there's a couple of elements in here that I think are perfectly suited for NURBS. I wouldn't do this part, and I wouldn't do this part, and I wouldn't do this part up here with SubD. I would do that with NURBS. And so let's just go ahead and throw that together. So we'll just go back to our standard toolbar. We'll come up here, and we're just going to draw this shape. And I'm going to leave the fillet out for now. And I'll go back and throw the fillet in. And I'm going to put a teeny tiny little fillet in here just so that these are round there. And I'm going to round this one as well. And let's go ahead and just revolve this. I'm just going to revolve this around 0. Let's see, let's revolve it here. And we want it to be full. So I'm just going to hit F, enter. One thing for folks who are just getting started with Rhino, when you look at the command line, you'll notice that one letter in the command line of each word is underlined. That's the hotkey for it. So if I want a full circle, I just hit F, enter, and that is going to complete the operation without having to have any other input. So that's a nice little tip. I'm going to move the base, the top of this down just a little bit because we're missing our shape by a little bit. So I'm going to move this down to here, and I'm going off the left side of this. The right side is a little wonky, so I'm going to go off the right or the left side of this, and that gives us basically where our bottle and our top are gonna intersect. And let's go ahead and draw the internal parts down here. So I'm going to just draw these in real quick. And this is something like this. And we're going to revolve this as well. And I'm just going to go off the center of this. Hit F, enter for a full circle complete. And that gives us our bits, right? And I'm going to hide this for now. And let's just go and do a little housework here. So I'm going to cap this, turn it into a solid object. I'm going to cap this, turn that into a solid object, and as long as they're both lined up, which they should be but aren't, let's fix that. I'm going to just snap that up here. Gumball, snappy dragging, if you want to make sure that it respects your O snaps. And I'm noticing, see my ISO params are all screwy? I did something wrong on this, so let's fix it. Let's go and revolve this around 0 because I did it wrong the first time. There we go. That's better. See how the isoparams are radial? We don't want them twisting like that. That was an indication that something was not good. And it looks like I'm a little off on my center line, so I'm gonna just line this up with that quad so that they line up. Everything should be concentric and lined up. Looks like the whole thing is slightly off center from the origin, so I'm going to just bring it over here and fix it. All right. So high precision operation we've got going on here. All right, let's Boolean these together. And the Boolean did something weird, right? Why did that piece disappear and this one didn't? That's because something about this is either open or backwards, or one of these is backwards. So we have to then take a look at the normals. And in this case, you can see that the problem is this one, the normals are facing in. So if I were to flip this and then cap it, which I forgot to do, which is why it failed. Now the normals are facing out on that one. The normals are facing out on this one. Now the Boolean should work just fine. All right, so if your Booleans do something different that you're not expecting, check the normals. Chances are one of them is backwards and you just need to flip it. All right, so let's look and see how this relates to our bottle. Now, I need to make a slight tiny little transition between here and there. And this is where I have to think about my down the road a little bit and think about what I want to do. I've got my bottle shape defined and I'm happy with it, but I want to be able to maintain the ability to modify this later if I need to. So I'm going to pick this SubD object, I'm going to move to a layer, and I'm going to say copy object to layer, and I'm going to call this SubD to edit later if needed. All right. I never make my layer names that long, but you get the point. And then I'm going to just hide it. And that way I've got this piece banked. If I move this out here and I turn the layer on, I've got this piece banked that if down the line the client makes a change, and I've converted this to NURBS, which we're going to do next, and I need to radically change the shape of the SubD, I've got the SubD still in the file. Okay, this is an important thing to kind of get used to doing. So now I'm going to actually take this, and I'm going to switch it to NURBS because we're going to make some more precision detailing with this thing. I'm going to say to NURBS, I'm going to let it run, and you're going to see that this now is a NURBS object. This is a closed polysurface. It's got a ton of isoparams in it. You can turn those off simply by coming here and say shut off the surface isocurve, which gets rid of a little bit of the surface detail. But you can see that it's a one-to-one translation, and anything that you had done on the SubD is going to come up exactly like it was in NURBS and SubD. So it's a one-to-one translation. So let's knock the top of this off, and we're going to just do that with wire cut. So I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to just cut this from here to here. I'm going to wire cut this, and I'm just going to go straight through the C-plane normal, and it's going to cut the top off. And the nice thing about wire cut is it cuts the top off, but it also caps it. So that gives us an opportunity to be able to work from this. And if I then want to connect this to the top, I'm going to just draw a circle and then grab that circle and extrude it. And that's going to be essentially the neck that this thing screws onto. So I'm going to cap this. And what I can do is I can either just simply Boolean this together, right? And create that, or we can do something a little bit more interesting, which I think we're going to do, which is I'm going to shift control click and delete that face, and you're like, you just made it, why are you getting rid of it? And then I'm going to come up here and then I'm going to trim this off. And what that does is I've built a gap, and sometimes you model surfaces, sometimes you model gaps, and in this case I'm modeling the gap because I'm going to fill the gap with the blend surf tool. And I'm just going to roll this right around in here, and I'm going to set this to tangency, and I'm going to back this off a little bit. I'm going to back this off a little bit just so it's not inverting, and then say okay. Join it up, and that gives me a much nicer transition. Let me shut the edges off here. Gives me a much nicer transition than it would had I just clipped it, Booleaned it, and filleted it, right? So now I can bring my detailing back, and this guy looks a little big for our bottle, so let's go to the front view and let's scale this just a hair, because I just think I think my sketch was a little big. Maybe that's a little small. This is why we design in 3D, not 2D, right? You can actually make decisions based on what you're seeing for real things instead of sketches where you can lie, cheat, and steal. All right, so that gives us our top. And the last thing that we need to work on is this element up here. And I think this is a perfect SubD project, right? We could do this in SubD. We could also do this in NURBS, I guess, if you're looking at it. This could be a revolved object that we cut in half. So that's actually possibly a way to do it as well. Actually, let's do it that way. I think that actually is probably a better way. So let's go and just draw a curve out like this, And let's fix the curve because our curve is terrible. And we don't want to have too many points. We want just enough points. Pull it in, something like that. And I'm going to overbuild it just a little bit so I can trim off that edge and get something really nice and clean there. All right, so let's call that done, and let's revolve that, and let's revolve it. Let's revolve it around here and just see what it looks like. And that gives us this kind of duck shape. I'm going to cap it, and then I'm going to wire cut the whole thing off slightly above that last point because there's a singularity there that I want to get rid of. So let's just wire cut. We're going to use the C-plane normal, and I'm going to get rid of the input object. Actually, no, I'm not going to keep all. I do the dumb thing so you don't have to. All right, so that's the cutting curve. This is the object to cut, and we are going to keep both. There we go. And then I can delete the side that I want instead of the one that it decided for me. All right, so that gives me the spout, and I don't like the aspect on it, so I'm going to just make it a little wider like that. And then it's a little sharp, so I'm going to round off this edge and then probably the bottom too. I just want to just knock that off just a little bit. So let's go here, and instead of putting fillets, I'm going to right click and use blends because I just like how they look better. And I should have addressed the seam. Actually, let's go back and fix that. I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm going to go back to here. This is the seam of the object, right? And I don't necessarily want that. So I think what I'm actually going to do is there's a command called surf seam that allows you to move the seam, but it's also just as simple to just rotate this thing 180 degrees so that the seam is at the bottom. Now, when I wire cut, the seam is going to be gone. Helps if I spell it right. Now the seam is going to be gone, and when I do my fillets, let's fix the aspect on that. Like that. Now, when we come down here and we do our blends, see how the seam is continuous now, and the seam is continuous over there, and the seam is continuous there. That's why we pay attention to where the seam is. All right, I'm going to preview this, and it's going to fail miserably because it's huge. And then we're going to say set all 0.01, and that pretty much does what I wanted it to do. It just knocks off the corners a little bit, makes it nice. All right, and then we want to have a little spout in here, so I'm going to do a trick. Shift Control click, let go, grab a drag handle and start dragging, tap the Alt key. See how that little plus shows up? See that next to my cursor? Let go, and that breaks off a surface. Shift drag on a scale handle, drag on an extrude handle, make sure it's not punching through anywhere, make a little adjustment like that, and then we're gonna do a Boolean subtract to get the opening for where the soap comes out. All right, just to make it look a little bit more realistic. All right, and then take this, plop it down on there so it intersects correctly, Boolean these two together if you want. You don't have to. And then the last thing that we would need to deal with is, some sort of like possible knurling or something on this so that the little grippy scribbles here that I showed. So let's hide everything, and let's Shift Control click on this edge, and I'm going to use a command in here called Dupe Edge. And this one allows you to pull a curve off of an object and use that for stuff that you want to do later. So in this case, I'm going to build the knurls. And then what I'm going to do is back out, and you can see how tiny that thing is. And we're going to do transform array polar. And this thing is actually so small that we might even have problems with this. And let's do, I don't know, let's do 80 of these. and you can see that that creates the little knurls that we want. Now, combining all of this stuff would make you absolutely insane if you had to trim each individual piece. So we're going to use a command called curve boolean. And I'm going to click outside of this to keep all of the exterior shapes. So think about it as it's like a ray that's going to hit the outside of this, and wherever it hits something outside, it's going to draw a new line. I'm going to delete all of the internal input and then let it go. And what this does is in one click, it takes all of that stuff and combines it. So imagine if you were trying to put this together, you know, with trim, that would make you kind of insane, right? So now that we have that, we can just drag the extrude handle, we get our knurling, cap it, and then we take our object, and then we figure out how the two of those relate. And then we can either combine them, or if there's a material change, we can leave them not combined. We can scale it up, scale it down, do whatever we want. In this case, I think I'm probably going to scale it up just a hair. And then I'm actually going to combine them because they're similar materials. And that gives us our finished piece. Okay, so 49 minutes with a lot of blabbing. That's kind of where we are. Now, the cool thing about this is because this is SubD, well, this isn't SubD anymore, but because we kept our SubD piece, we can very easily take this and modify it and get 2 or 3 or 4 variations. Just drag, tap, alt, and you get a copy, right? So change this to a new layer, hide the original, so we've got it kept. And now all we have to do is edit this any way that we want, and we've got a new variation, right? We've got this shape, we've got this shape, we've got, you know, maybe we do a really tall one that's, you know, more for a kitchen. This is all billable. If you're a consultant and you do design for a living, these 3 cut and pastes, those are entirely new products that you can bill for. So this is not only a really awesome design tool, this is a cash printing ATM where every time you make an edit to this, it's a new iteration. Your clients are going to be giddy because your workflow productivity is going to be through the roof. You're going to be giddy because you're getting paid what you're worth, because you're able to do all of this work and bill for it. And you know, everybody's happy. So this is something that I worked as a consultant for 20 years before I started working for McNeil. I ran a design business. I built thousands of models. I worked with hundreds of clients. And this is the kind of stuff that, like normal software demos, they don't talk about. They don't talk about how this affects your business. This particular tool, this SubD workflow, once you've got these hard parts built, you know, these are purchased parts. This is something that you're going to buy from a factory. The bottles, when you design these things, you know, if you want to edit this thing and make a completely different shape, it's as simple as grabbing a few faces, and now, you know, this has got a completely different look to it now, right? That's a billable change. That's something that you can make money off of. All right, we can argue about whether it's good design, bad design all day long. The fact remains that now you can design at the speed of your imagination. And the best part about it is you can get paid for it, right? You don't have to suffer for hours and hours and hours and hours trying to rebuild a NURBS model for something like this that will, you know, result in you making $6 an hour. Okay, so with that, I think if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them now. If there's anything that you saw that you want to look into a little bit more, we can talk about that. But if not, I think that's probably what I have for you today. All of these videos, by the way, are on our YouTube channel, which is here. This is Rhinoceros 3D. I will copy that and paste it in the chat. Make sure that you check all of this out. This is where all of the old stuff gets placed. We also have a Vimeo that's ad-free if you don't wanna deal with YouTube blasting ads at you. But we have both of that. So the link, the video is just going to be here. It's going to be on the YouTube page. It'll be listed in the Getting Started for Rhino Windows playlist, which will be this playlist here. This is the Getting Started for Rhino for Windows playlist. That'll be stuck in there. We do have a Vimeo, and let me see if I can. I don't use it very often, but if you don't want to watch ads, this is our here's the Vimeo. Am I going to make the threads on the bottles? Not in this video. I don't make threads anymore, and the reason why, I'll show you why. There's a website in the US called McMaster Car, and this is a hardware supply. And basically what they do is, say for instance, I wanted something that's threaded. I can go to threaded rods. I can go to here. I can pick any of these threads, pick this object, and I can go to the product detail. Check this out. There's downloads for this thing. So I can download a 3D step. I can download that, file import. And obviously this isn't the right thread for this thing, but you can find the right thread here. I can bring this in. I can scale this to the right size. I can Boolean this in, and now I've got threads. Okay, so I don't model threads anymore. I just go get them. And so this is McMaster Car. I'll give you the link for that as well. Awesome company. I buy all of my hardware stuff from them. They don't pay me. This is just a fan of their website. I like their stuff, and I love the fact that they gave all these CAD files for all of the stuff. If you're printing stuff, by the way, this is a really awesome site because you can pick the specific stuff you want. Like say you want this bolt, I can put the bolt in here and Boolean it out, and it will put the threads in my model. And then I can print it. I can buy the parts from McMaster. They show up on my doorstep the day I get my stuff off the printer. And you clean them up with a tap, and they screw right in. How do you make it empty? There is a shell command. In this particular case, what I probably would have done if the goal was to have this be empty, I would have shelled it before I put the threads on. So let's take a look at that. We can run the shell command, and I want my thickness to be, I have no idea how big this thing is. Let's figure out how big it is first. All right, so that's a very small bottle. Let's do it at, let's shell it at 0.1. Pick the top to get rid of. It says the shell is not solid, so we need to inspect where it failed. The nice thing about shell in Rhino is it will do everything it can to give you a result, even if it's not perfect. And in this case, we would need to go back and repair these particular surfaces. We can try it at a different value, maybe. We did 0.01. Let's do 0.005. See if that looks better. And that one actually worked just fine. So that would make it empty. So there is a shell command there. You are going to want to inspect the result. and take a peek at that. The other thing that you can do is before you convert it to SubD, you can offset the SubD, which is usually what I do, so that I've got an inside bottle and an outside bottle, and then I just model them together. That avoids having to shell it later. All right. Any other questions? You can hit me up on the forum for sure. My handle on the forum is the outside, so you can mention me at the outside. That's on the forum. The forum is discourse. discourse.mcneil.com. Or you can hit the comments on the YouTube video. I usually keep an eye on those. So, how to change the command line to the very top. You can drag it, you can pull it off, and you can stick it up there if you want. So the trick with the Rhino interface is you go over here till you see the crossing arrows, drag the piece around, and then wherever you want to place it, see where the purple is, let go, and that way you can move it around. Any other questions? Alrighty, I think that's about it. Hope everybody had a good time. I appreciate you for coming out. If you have any questions, hit me up on the forum or hit me up on the YouTube link and or the YouTube. Can you repeat last move? This up here where I moved the command line. Go over here where you see how my cursor changes to crossing arrows. Click and hold, drag it off while you're still holding. I can drag it around, I can put it wherever I want. Actually, I can move it to the bottom, I can move it to the top. Wherever you see, keep moving around until the purple lines up, and wherever the purple is, then let go, and that's where it'll drop. Same thing with all the other palette items. I can pull this off, drag it around if I want to put it top, bottom, right, left, wherever the purple is, let go, and that's where it'll go. And then you can adjust it. By dragging. So the double arrow allows you to adjust the aspect of it. The quad arrow allows you to pull it off. You can do the same thing with all the tabs. If I drag a tab and pull it off, I can pull it off and float that. So if I've got a second monitor, I can stick this over on a second monitor. Okay, any other questions? When is next tutorial? That's a good question. Check the Learn page. If we go to the on-demand classes, or no, live classes. I know live. You always make it difficult to find this. Live online classes. Getting started live. Here we go. This is the link to find that. There you go. So the next one, today's the 23rd. Next one looks like March 10th, and that's going to be a Mac version if you're interested in the Mac version. All the modeling stuff is, the same. So the stuff that we model on the Mac works on the PC. The interface is just a little bit different. Any other questions? Appreciate it. Thanks for coming. All right. Have a great time. Happy modeling. Let us know if there's anything we can do to help you out, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.